We were able to reach what we coin as a satisfactory settlement agreement for Miss Lewis against Alberta Health Services and the physicians involved.
They didn't even have a written policy when they made this decision. They just made a decision around a table. They played God. And they don't have any right to play God. Their job, like I said earlier, was to perform a surgery on somebody needing to survive with a transplant.
Sydney Fizzard for Rebel News. Today we have a breaking news story on Sheila Annette Lewis. Previously, Alberta Health Services denied her the life-saving organ transplant she needs to survive her terminal condition after doctors tried to force her and her family to take multiple COVID shots. This legal battle saw a publication ban introduced, preventing the names of doctors, the hospital in question, and the organ she needs to survive from being identified. The Supreme Court sided with the doctors via their dismissal of her charter violations case with the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, and forced her to pay the legal fees of AHS and the doctors involved. There are an untold number of victims being denied this life-saving care over their COVID shot status, and many more to come. This is why we at Rebel News ask you to sign our petition calling on our provincial health minister, Adriana Lagrange, to end the application of these coercive COVID shot mandates. You can sign that petition at organsnotcoercion.ca. With time running out, Sheila began searching for international hospitals to perform this transplant, as most do not have these same COVID shot measures, especially considering Sheila's natural immunity to COVID, something her doctors refused to test for. The costs of getting this transplant internationally were estimated at over $500,000 United States dollars, which supporters rapidly began crowdfunding for through a Give Send Go campaign. On top of her international pursuit, after the Supreme Court dismissal, Sheila launched a new lawsuit against AHS for medical malpractice, with Umar Sheikh of Sheikh Law. From this lawsuit, a breaking development has occurred. Sheila and the parties involved have now signed a deal her lawyer describes as satisfactory for Sheila. In our previous interviews, she detailed how much she wanted this transplant, and it is likely the only thing she would have agreed to. This outcome would mean she has been put back on the list to receive the operation she needs to survive. Although this may seem to be good news for Sheila, it's not certain she will receive this transplant, especially in a timely manner. Today, we interview Miss Lewis's lawyer, Umar Sheikh, to give us the latest details on this new development and what it means for Sheila Annette Lewis.
So my name is Umar Sheikh. I'm principal and founder of Sheikh Law here in Victoria, British Columbia. Miss Lewis reached out to us to get help after her charter challenge with the JCCF, the Justice Centre, did not unfortunately yield the results that she needed with respect to being able to get her organ transplant. And so we took over that case approximately 2 months ago, maybe 2.5 months ago now. We began the case by filing a claim for negligence and medical malpractice against the physicians involved. We were seeking an order that she be put back on the transplant list. What's important to note here is some of the things we looked at in the context of what Miss Lewis was going through. First and foremost, what we argued was that the COVID vaccine requirement was not an indispensable requirement for transplant, meaning that it wasn't something that had to be there in order for you to get a transplant. The reality is that transplant surgeries were taking place at the same rate that they were before COVID as they were during COVID. And so they were transplanting people with COVID, people who had gotten infected. None of that had changed. And so we looked at that issue. We looked at what impacts a natural immunity could have on Miss Lewis. She had contracted COVID twice in the past and had very high antibodies, and she was tested for those. So we looked at a number of things and began working within the system to try and find some relief for Miss Lewis.
They didn't even have a written policy when they made this decision. They just made a decision around a table. They played God. And they don't have any right to play God. Their job, like I said earlier, was to perform a surgery on somebody needing to survive with a transplant.
Ultimately, as of last Friday, we were able to reach what we coin as a satisfactory settlement agreement for Miss Lewis against Alberta Health Services and the physicians involved. As you know, we were under and are still under an order that does not allow us to discuss what organ and what doctors and what treatments that she would be getting. But what I can say as part of the settlement is that it is satisfactory to Miss Lewis. We do expect things to proceed in the right direction for Miss Lewis here on forward. We will be closely monitoring that. We're very pleased that she's pleased with the outcome of this case. And, we all have our fingers crossed and our prayers are with her to hopefully get her where she needs to be. But certainly, there was a tremendous effort on behalf of the other council, myself and others, to try and bring some reason to this situation and to try and resolve it in a way that makes sense for everyone involved. And so I think that's what we've done. We look forward to her getting better soon. Now, unfortunately, because the settlement is extremely confidential, all we're allowed to say on it is that it's a satisfactory settlement agreement for a confidential agreement for both parties. But other than that, we're not allowed to comment any further on it, nor would we. We don't want to upset anything that's been done here in terms of the work and risk any future Miss Lewis has in the healthcare system. We were working, for Miss Lewis and doing everything we could to help her on a pro bono basis. She's made that public, and so we're able to reveal that. However, yes, there were costs assessed against her. What I can tell you is we were very alive to those costs, and so we reached a satisfactory settlement on all matters in this case, and so hopefully that gives people some clue as to where that issue went. Thank you very much, Sydney. We really appreciate the work that you've done. I know Miss Lewis is immensely grateful. It's helped tremendously with fundraising for her healthcare needs, and she feels well supported by Rebel and your work.
Although this is good news for Sheila Annette Lewis, there's an untold number of Canadians already denied life-saving organ transplants over their COVID-19 vaccination status. And even more will be added to this list, left for dead in the future if this doesn't end. Alberta Health Services denies having a vaccine mandate because these injections were forcefully mandated onto Sheila at the discretion of her treating physicians, but they were still contracted by AHS. The Premier would say this is out of her hands, but we heard from Umar previously that Alberta has been a revolutionary force in changing healthcare provisions for transplant patients in the past.
Alberta has led the way in changing transplants in North America for people who are older than 65, for people with cognitive disabilities. We know these exemptions can be made. We know that different decisions can be made. We know that this is perhaps an excellent opportunity for Alberta to say, let's run a trial.
We at Rebel News think there's something wrong when Canadians are being denied life-saving care over these arbitrary or even harmful mandates, especially if done through our own tax-paid healthcare. This is why we started a petition calling on Alberta's Health Minister, Adriana Lagrange, to end these coercive tactics. Especially for COVID, not taking the shot shouldn't be a death sentence if you require an organ transplant. If you agree, sign the petition at organsnotcoercion.ca. For Rebel News, Sydney Fizzard. If you wish to see more of our reporting on Sheila Annette Lewis, go to organsnotcoercion.ca. And while you're there, consider signing the petition that we plan on dropping off to our health minister here in Alberta, Adriana Lagrange. We want to make sure that they know what they're doing has a real impact on everyday Canadians.